This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
The outsiders have us with a 3% title odds and 6th in the East. That's Vegas right now. I was very surprised by that because the ingredients to be a championship contender are there. Now, we need to prove it, but when you have Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, you have two superstars, and then you've got a great coach now with Doc. You know, we need to show it on the floor, but that's the formula for a championship contender.
That was new Sixers basketball president Daryl Morey earlier today on the Sports Bash. A lot of great points he made throughout that interview. Of course, we'll talk more about it this hour here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin McCormick, our 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers writer, will join us coming up less than 20 minutes from now to get more into what Morey had to say, the Sixers offseason, and more. Of course, the PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. So we'll play some of these Morey cuts throughout the hour today. Of course, if you missed the interview, you can go check it out on our 97.3 ESPN YouTube channel, the full interview. Also, we got to talk about a little bit about the Eagles and the NFL trade deadline. The trade deadline, of course, coming and going, and the Eagles made no move. So we got that and more coming up this hour here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. But I would be remiss if I didn't start with the Eagles stuff because I'll be 100% honest. I am shocked and a little disappointed I'm definitely disappointed. I'm disappointed in the way that for those of you who were very passionate about your candidates in the election today, whoever your person is, whether it's for president or the U.S. Congress or whatever office that you're passionate about, when your candidate doesn't win tonight, you're going to be disappointed. And I kind of feel the same way right now with the Eagles not making a trade. And I thought a very interesting set of points was made right around the trade deadline. And those points were brought up by Sports Illustrated NFL insider Albert Breer and echoed by Adam Kaplan of Inside the Birds podcast you hear every Thursday on the Sports Bash. And both of them brought up the three problems with the trade deadline this year. Number one, the asking prices have been relatively high on veteran players. Number two, the 2021 salary cap makes it tougher to take guys on due to or asking for big money past this year. Number three, looming cap shortfalls. Value of draft picks is skyrocketing. And Adam Kaplan said the second reason the 2021 cap is the biggest problem in the league right now. Cap challenges for next year and uncertainty what the number will actually be is a big problem. And I completely understand that. And I'm not factoring that out at all. And I completely understand that there's a lot of financial stuff that goes into what decisions are or are not made. I completely understand that in a world where people play fantasy football and Madden and all that stuff, everybody thinks that they're a GM and they're an expert because they can make a trade on their video game, even though it is not based in reality, even though they think it's based in reality, based on the settings that they put out there on their video game. But the reality is that the financial situation in the NFL is definitely a dicey situation. And I will not overlook that. I will not dismiss that. I will not, just throw that to the wind. But at the same time, what is Howie Roseman's strength? Howie Roseman's strength has been and always will be the numbers guy. He is somebody who understands the numbers game better than anybody. He understands how to make the numbers work, how to shuffle things around, how to put yourself in a position to get the most out of your salary cap with your players. And it's very obvious that for whatever reason, he was unable to do that this time around. And if the insiders are correct, and I trust people like Adam Kaplan and Albert Breer and those like Dan Graziano, who was saying on Get Up this morning on ESPN television about how the deadline was going to be quiet because of asking price issues. I'm not ignoring those people, and they all bring up valid points. But I think that if the Eagles were being honest with themselves about their situation, they could have been a little more aggressive at the deadline. They could have been a little bit more forceful when it comes to getting a deal done, because this team has needs. This team has question marks at linebacker, at cornerback, on the offensive line. They could have done a little bit of depth, and they've done it multiple times in the past. The Eagles are a team that has made trades before the deadline. This is not an organization that is typically quiet. Howie Roseman has a history of making trades. He has a history of making deals. And for the Eagles to sit there and be quiet, like I said, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in Howie. I'm disappointed in the Eagles for not finding a way to get a deal done. And what's more disheartening is that you're in a division that, are you in control of it right now? Yes. But you're not dominating the division. This isn't the Patriots in the AFC East for all those years with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. The Eagles are 3-4-1. They are by no means crushing the division or anything like that. So I don't understand in what world does making no move except for releasing Jason Kroom, who caught a touchdown a couple weeks ago from Carson Wentz. In what world does not doing anything make sense? And again, I'm not dismissing the reasons why it didn't happen, and I completely understand it. And as an objective individual, I accept those reasons. Listen, there were a lot of reports out there, for example, for the Packers. They were looking at acquiring Will Fuller from the Texans, and the Texans apparently were looking for a first or second round pick for Will Fuller. And for the Packers, that was too high of a price to pay to bring Aaron Rodgers another wide receiver. So I understand that there were teams out there asking for a lot. But for example, we've heard Andrew DeCecco on Football at 4 on the Sports Bash for 3 straight weeks now mention it'd be nice if the Eagles went out and got Frank Gore because they could use a veteran running back and a guy who's really good at running in between the tackles. You're telling me it would have taken a lot to go get Frank Gore at this point in his career? Probably not. You probably could have got him for a conditional 6th-round pick, for goodness sake. You look at an organization like the Texans, who I just mentioned. Yeah, we know that they're getting rid of players, but you're telling me that one of their low-price linebackers couldn't have been available? A guy like Martin, maybe? You can go out and get Martin, get him for a little bit of depth at the linebacker position. I think that this idea that the Eagles couldn't have found a way to get a deal done is a little sad. And I'm not thrilled about it, to say the least. 609-403-0973 for the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. Of course, Game Night being brought to you by Matt Black Kia. Matt Black Kia wants to get you approved today. Matt Black Kia on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. Reminder, still coming up tonight, Kevin McCormick, our 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers beat writer, will get into what Daryl Morey had to say to Mike Gill earlier on the Sports Bash today, as well as to say the Sixers going into this bizarro world offseason with the NBA. They're trying to figure out their start date. The draft is on the 18th. They might start the season on the 22nd of December or the 22nd of January. We don't know yet. The players want it to be January because they want to start the season on MLK Day, and the owners want to start around Christmas so they can max out the regional sports network money. Adam Silver has said that there's a $1 million loss of revenue potentially. So there's a lot of stuff going on with the NBA. We'll get into some of that a little bit later this hour. 609-403-0973 is the text board. Texter chimes in and says, I agree, Josh. The Eagles should have made a move. They will be hosting a playoff game in 10 weeks. Yeah, and you're not making the move, Texter. I'm glad you brought that up. You're not making the move for next week or the week after, okay? You're not making the trade to beat the Giants. You're not making the move to be more competitive with, let's say, the Seahawks, right? No, you're making the trade so when you get to the postseason, you have insurance. What did Bruce Arians say multiple times about the signing of Antonio Brown? He's insurance, okay? They're not expecting Antonio Brown to come in there and be the all-pro receiver that he was a few years ago with the Steelers. They're expecting him to come in there and be a very good fill-in if they need him to be. And I think the Eagles, they overlooked the opportunity to just go out and get a little insurance. You know, Jay Ajayi wasn't brought to Philadelphia to be the bell cow back in 2017. He was brought here to be insurance in case something happened to LeGarrette Blount, for example, or if Corey Clement couldn't keep doing what he was doing that year. So, like I said, I'm disappointed in the Sixers. As I mentioned earlier here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN, Daryl Morey was on the Sports Bash, and he had a lot of interesting things to say. And I played one of those at the top of the show about how, you know, he thinks the outsiders, people outside the organization, don't understand what they have. And there was a lot of things that he said about Ben and Joel and different things. But there were a couple things that stood out to me. And I wanted to start with this specific audio cut of Daryl Morey talking about the biggest reason why he decided to come to Philadelphia. Take a listen.
Well, it's a big factor in me coming here because I had worked with Doc before. We know he's a championship coach. You know, there's a reason that he lasted 7-8 years at his last two stops. He's an unbelievable coach, unbelievable motivator, knows how to get the most out of his players. Obviously proved it with a championship already and getting to deep in the playoffs a bunch of other times.
I don't think we can undersell the value of the Doc Rivers hire, because if Doc Rivers is the guy that got a very well-respected guy like Daryl Morey to come to Philadelphia and Elton Brand to be so willing to work with Daryl Morey in the Sixers front office, if Doc Rivers was the catalyst for that domino effect, then I don't think we can undersell how good the Sixers can be under Doc Rivers. You know, I always talk about how the head coaching position, in my mind, is not about X's and O's. It's about egos. And Doug Peterson has done an incredible job here in Philadelphia at getting his team to the postseason each and every year. The team doesn't quit on him. You don't see the players, you know, out there lollygagging or not trying on plays or giving half effort. No, the guys all go out there playing hard. Now, the quarterback may be an idiot and make some dumb plays, but the players in general are not out there just going through the motions like they were, for example, previously under Chip Kelly, who they were playing despite of their dislike for the head coach. And I think there was a level of malaise and complacency that came to the Sixers play under Brett Brown at the very end. So for Doc Rivers, if someone like Daryl Morey, who knew him from Boston, respected him when he was in Houston, and now is coming to Philadelphia to work with him, I don't think we can undersell the value of Doc Rivers. And speaking of Doc Rivers, listen to what Morey had to say about the perception that he and Rivers have of the Sixers.
Both of us thought we were going to be off for at least a year. And when we dug into this roster, we were like, wait, this has Ben Simmons, this has Joel Embiid, and this has, Al Horford and Josh Richardson and Tobias and some really good role players that Elton did a nice job in bringing in last year.
So again, two well-respected basketball men are saying, look, we weren't probably going to go out there and run to the next job. We weren't going to go out there, and the expectation for Daryl was never to just go back into work. The expectation for Doc wasn't to jump right back in 2 feet first for a job. But both of them looked at the Sixers situation and said, we can't pass this up. We like what the Sixers and Elton Brand are doing. We want to be a part of that. And Morey and Doc Rivers have both said now, in multiple times, in multiple interviews, they have both said the same thing again and again and again and again. They came here for Ben and Joel. And if two respected basketball men came here for Ben and Joel, who am I to say that Ben and Joel can't be cornerstones for a team that wins a championship? Again, that's just me, okay? So I'm willing to give Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers the latitude to go out there and try to win with this team before I make any over-the-top decisions when it comes to the future of Ben and Joel in Philadelphia. If those two men came to Philadelphia because of Embiid and Simmons, I'm going to give them the opportunity to come here and work with them before I make any further decisions. 609-403-0973 is the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. 609-403-0973. Kevin McCormick, our 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers beat writer, joins me next here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
This Philly team reminds me a lot of when I came to Houston with Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming. It reminds me a lot. Actually, the players past the two superstars here in Philly are much better than in Houston. It took us a couple years to build up the role players in Houston, and then unfortunately, when Tracy got hurt.
That was Daryl Morey earlier today on the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. He's the new president of basketball operations in Philadelphia. I would argue that Yao and McGrady is probably one of the best duos in NBA history to never win a title. Because those who may or may not remember that duo, Yao, when he was healthy, was incredible. Sounds familiar, right? Like Joel Embiid. And McGrady is probably one of the most underrated scoring threats of the last 20 years. So to compare Ben and Joel to those two is pretty high praise. By the way, both those guys in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Joining me to talk more about the state of the Sixers heading into the offseason, as well as Daryl Morey, is our own 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers beat writer Kevin McCormick. Joins me here on Game Day on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, how you doing tonight?
Josh, I'm feeling great, dude. After all this Daryl Morey news and hearing him talk to Gil and Broads earlier, I'm excited.
And I think people should be excited because Morey, and I think Morey made this clear as well during his interview and during the presser yesterday, Doc and him are almost a package deal at this point. He has said now that he came here because of Doc Rivers. And I think that it can't be emphasized enough, Kevin, that the pairing of Doc and Daryl completely changes the dynamic of the organization.
Absolutely. And it's one of the main things that Elton Brand talked about in his exit interview when Brett Brown was relieved of his duties was that the organization needed changes from top to bottom. And what two better men to go and get than Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey? I mean, it's not every offseason that executives and coaches of that caliber kind of just fall into your lap for the way they did with the Sixers. So two great additions, and I agree. I think they're going to be great in changing the culture and the identity and hopefully being able to get the most out of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid moving forward.
I'm glad you said the names Ben and Joel because Doc and Daryl have made it very, very, very clear that they came here because of Ben and Joel. They didn't come here to get rid of one of those guys. They came here because the situation with those two players appeals to them at a very high level. What does that say to you that not one, but two of those guys and Elton Brand are all interested in keeping Ben and Joel here?
I think it speaks volumes to just how good they can be together. I mean, like I had just said about how it's not every day that these kind of guys fall into your lap into an organization. If you look at guys like Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey, there's not many opportunities out there where you leave a situation like you were with, the Rockets and the Clippers to be able to come into a situation like the Sixers where you have not one, but two top-level potential NBA talents getting ready to head into their prime. So the fact that they think that highly of them just makes me feel more confident that they'll be able to help them take that next step as they enter their primes.
Daryl was also asked by Mike Gill earlier today. I thought that was a very incredible, interesting answer when he was asked about Joel Embiid and about, the play of big men in the league and the style of the league where it's at. And I thought it was interesting that, he told Mike that, look, it's hard to find big men who can play both ends of the court. And he thinks that the reason why the league went away from, the dominant big man wasn't because there's no more dominant, more so there was no more dominant big men than it was that the style of the league should be more guard oriented. What are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that's an aspect and an angle of looking at the league I think a lot of people have not thought of before.
I thought it was interesting, but I think there was a lot of truth to it as well. Obviously, it's kind of hard to say that the league is going away from big men where we just saw a combination of LeBron James and Anthony Davis lead a Lakers team to a title with no real, premier guard. I mean, they had guys like Rondo out there for them, but it was mainly them at the big position, and Anthony Davis was huge in these playoffs. So I agree a lot with what Daryl said is just that maybe the reason teams have gone away from big men is just, big men like Joel Embiid don't come around all the time. I mean, outside of Joel, you have Jokic, Cat, Anthony Davis, if you consider him maybe a small ball center. So I feel like the league shifted towards guards just because it became, just a premier talent of guards came through the wave of the NBA as opposed to past decades where bigs came through. So the fact that he still sees Joel Embiid as a premier talent and that a player of his caliber can still lead a team was definitely interesting because of his small ball experiment in Houston. But, I think he was right in saying that.
Just to further that point, I think it's also interesting that when you think about the game of basketball, look at all the tall guys who are perimeter players now. Dirk Nowitzki 20 years ago, Kevin Durant in recent years. It feels like that. Is it that there's no more big men, or is it that the traditional big man has morphed positions? Like the old saying was, when you would ask the old school boxers, when they were alive, the Joe Frazier's and, those guys, why are there no heavyweights today? They said, well, people stopped boxing, they went and played football. So it's kind of like almost the same concept where a lot of these big men, they're not in the post anymore. They're just on the perimeter.
And I feel like part of it's just, like how you kind of just said, the positions morphed a little bit. I think in today's game, people look for your premier centers to be more multi-tooled. As in back in the day, it was more, setting screens and rolling to the rim, rebounding, shot blocking, stuff like that. While now in today's game, you're either a rim running center or a stretch five center. So the fact that not many players like Joel Embiid come around who can do both kind of puts an emphasis on just kind of the potential that there is there with the multifaceted center position.
Kevin McCormick joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973 for all your Sixers and NBA coverage year long. All you guys work over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Now, another thing I thought interesting what Morey mentioned, just to stick with Morey for a second, is he brought up Yao Ming multiple times today and yesterday. And I think Yao Ming is a very interesting analogy for Embiid because what was the big issue with Yao? if Yao is healthy, right? For those of us who who lived through that era of Yao Ming, the whole thing was, well, if Yao Ming's healthy, this team can win a championship. And that feels like it's a very appropriate analogy to Embiid because, like Embiid, Yao was a unicorn. He was a 7'6" guy who could shoot from 18, 20 feet out. He was a great block shotter. He was underrated as a defender. So, you could argue that if anybody is qualified to come in here and build a team around a unicorn big man, it has to be Daryl Morey based on his experience with Yao.
And to build off of that, I believe one of the last things that Morey talked about with Gil and Broads today was, I believe Gil asked him if he could go back and change anything and right one of his wrongs in the past. Maybe this is a chance for him to do that. Like you said, there's a lot of similarities between Yao Ming's career and what Joel Embiid's career has been so far. So the fact that you're bringing in a guy who's had this experience, maybe Daryl is able to speak on Joel Embiid's level a little more to, kind of show him the emphasis of the importance of taking care of yourself and, taking care of your body conditioning wise to be able to right that wrong and having that center that can stay healthy and lead you to a championship.
What is your thoughts on what, though, the Sixers are going to do this offseason now with Morey as part of that front office? Because I feel like it changes the perspective of the offseason in general, because what was Elton Brand going to do, right? Elton Brand's in charge. Now it's Daryl and Elton making the joke about we're going to be stuck in a room together, and Daryl made the joke today that the room's getting kind of stale in the smell, because they've been in there so long together. He had to take a break and all that kind of stuff. But in seriousness, it seems like that the perception of this offseason has to completely change now, because you're going from Elton Brand, who only has about 2 years and change of NBA front office experience under his belt, to having a guy in Daryl Morey with almost 18 years of front office experience paired with Elton in the front office.
Yeah, they're definitely an interesting front office duo, but in terms of what this offseason is going to look like, after hearing Daryl and Doc talk yesterday in the press conference, it honestly makes me feel more confident that the Sixers are going to run it back with this group heading into the next season, as opposed to trying to scrap everything on the fly. And it's honestly something that I'm not totally against. Obviously, when you talk about Daryl Morey, you talk about all the crazy trades he's done and the magnitude that he's done with flipping rosters on the fly. But the fact that him and Doc both said that they're going to get in the lab and they're going to study everything and they're going to come to have a full understanding before they make any moves, I think is the proper move. Because although tweaks to the Sixers roster still need to be made, it's better that they have the full understanding and wait for the proper move to come around, as opposed to making moves just for the sake of making moves.
Does that lead you to think that maybe we see a little less movement this offseason than maybe the regular Sixer fans would maybe want to see? Because we've heard now multiple times from Daryl and from Doc about wanting to see what they can do with the current roster.
Yeah, I feel like once Daryl Morey got here, everyone's eyes kind of lit up and they thought, the Al Horford trade was going to happen and this and that. And they had this checklist right from day one. But realistically, I don't see that happening right now. After hearing the way that they talk, Doc Rivers even said he feels that this roster's loaded. So I think before anything's done, I think they're going to try and get in the lab and see what they can figure out to see if there is anything left with this roster before they go into potential trade avenues, whether it's for Al Horford, Josh Richardson, you name it. I feel like this core is going to take the floor one more time together before any of them are traded.
Now, we saw the Sixers play Al Horford off the bench at times before the season ended. Could that be something that continues in the Doc Rivers era? Because we know Doc has a very, very long history of taking talented players and turning them into bench players. He did it with multiple guys with the Clippers. He was a guy who made Glenn Baby Davis into this off the bench weapon, basically. And then you go back to his time in Orlando, he had Darrell Armstrong and Bo Outlaw as these incredible role players. So is it possible that Doc maybe does something similar with some of these guys and we don't see Al Horford in the starting lineup?
I wouldn't be shocked if Al Horford was coming off the bench next year for multiple reasons. Just because, one, I mean, we already saw last year, the fit with him and Embiid on the floor together was just clunky. So I doubt day one we see them still together in large samples. And we still don't know what position Ben Simmons will be playing next year. And if you want to keep him at that point forward role, you obviously need to open up a forward role. So Al Horford is obviously, subject number one to slide to the bench. And the biggest factor, I think, is that I think Doc Rivers is going to move Tobias Harris back to that power forward role just because of his time in LA and where he saw he could thrive. And Doc had him at a borderline all-star level talent, averaging close to 20 a game, shooting above 40% from three. So I think moving Tobias Harris back to that power forward role and creating mismatches on offense is something that Doc Rivers is going to bring to Philadelphia with him. So realistically, yeah, for an overpriced six-man, it kind of is what it is, but I wouldn't be shocked if Al Horford is coming off the bench to start this season.
I would be regressive if I also didn't ask you, speaking of the coaching staff, how impressed are you with the collection of coaches that Doc has gotten to join this staff? I mean, I know that for the national NBA media, the Mike D'Antoni joining the Nets staff is a flashy situation, but I'm incredibly impressed with the guys that they brought in here for this staff, Dave Yeager included. I mean, Dave Yeager is one of those guys who's got fire the moment he rolls out of bed in the morning. So, I mean, you're talking about a completely different element of coaching staff walking in here, not just with Doc Rivers, but with the assistants as well.
Yeah, Doc Rivers has absolutely knocked it out of the park, bringing in a top-level staff to join him in Philadelphia. Like you said, Dave Yeager is a great mind and is somebody that was in the running for a head coaching spot. So now that you have two kind of premier head coaching talents at the front of your coaching staff is always good. And then even if you're diving back deeper to the staff, to guys like Dan Burke, who's been around the league for 15-plus years, who's a great defensive mind and should be great for Joel Embiid, and Sam Cassell, who's another guy who played in the NBA for over a decade. I think having him at the end of the bench, I think he is going to do wonders for a guy like Shake Milton, who is still learning to grow as a guard and is hungry to learn.
Yeah, also Sam Cassell's got that thing where he can walk in the room and say, hey, boy, I got rings. Listen to me. And by the way, Sam Cassell, when he was winning those rings with the Rockets, he was a role player, and he later became a bona fide starter in the league with that Minnesota team that had a chance to maybe go to the NBA Finals if he didn't hurt himself on that celebration back in, I think it was 2004, but I digress. Hey, well, that's another thing. Sam Cassell could say, hey, don't be stupid like me. So Kevin, I'm a big believer in former players in the NBA being coaches because I think it holds so much weight to me, even more than other sports.
Absolutely. And I mean, even look at Doc Rivers. He's a former player in himself. So, I mean, the fact that we have two former NBA guards here should be great for the growth of guys like Shake Milton, Matisse Thybulle, even Ben Simmons in terms of growing as a playmaker. But I agree, having not only former players, but former players who have had success in their playing career is going to be great as this new staff comes in to kind of win the locker room and have the respect of the players coming in.
He's Kevin McCormick. Follow him on Twitter at KevinMCC973 for all your Sixers and NBA coverage. Check out his work over at 97.3 ESPN.com as all guests he appeared here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, always appreciate the time, and depending on how these negotiations go, we'll either have an NBA season starting December 22nd or January 22nd, it looks like.
It's going to be crazy. I mean, it looks like the December 22nd is going to happen. I believe the vote's Thursday, but I mean, who knows? Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be a sprint to next season.
I say they should just compromise and have I think they should have the exhibition season start on Christmas Day and then the regular season start on the 22nd. But that's just my opinion.
Listen, after all these moves the Sixers are making, I want them to start next week. So, I mean, as soon as you can get me Sixer basketball, I'll take it.
Well, come on, man. We need the draft first, okay? Then we gotta hyper-analyze that. You've been writing about 200 articles about draft prospects. Let's get the draft out of the way first, man.
Fair enough. Hey, the draft's going to be fun, too. I mean, 5 picks, whether they make them or not, it's going to be juicy. And like you said, I've been doing my deep dive in this draft class.
Go check those out over at 973ESPN.com and the 973 ESPN mobile app. Kevin, we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Josh. Take care.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Game Night being brought to you by GMS Law. Make the right call. With 4 convenient locations to serve you, visit them online at gmslaw.com. We'll get back to the text board next at 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. By the way, you can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hennig on Twitter. Of course, every night after the show, we post our Game Night podcast. So if you missed any part of the show, you can catch it right there. I post it on the website, 973ESPN.com. Also on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Sea Isle City. Before I get back to the text board at 609-403-0973 for the PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board 609-403-0973. Just when I thought the Dallas Cowboys couldn't get any more ridiculous, this report by Tom Pelissero from NFL Network is mind-blowing, okay? So here's the deal. So Andy Dalton, according to reports, not according to reports, he's been placed on the COVID-19 list, all right? He's been ruled out for the Steelers game. According to reports, he has contracted COVID-19 himself, all right? So Andy Dalton, according to reports, has COVID. So he's not going to play. He's unavailable for the second straight week. But now, okay, now we have a whole nother layer in this mess, okay? And that layer is this, according to Tom Pelissero, the Cowboys are benching Ben DiNucci. They are going to elevate Cooper Kupp from the practice squad to the active roster at some point this week because they're going to have a quarterback competition between Garrett Gilbert and Cooper Rush to see who should start versus the Steelers because that's how bad Ben DiNucci was in the eyes of the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, holy Toledo. What is going on in Dallas? First of all, Cooper Kupp is a pretty nice dude, okay? He's a pretty cool guy. He's been on the Sports Bash down on Radio Row before. He was a pretty chill dude, all right? So I got nothing bad to say about Cooper Rush, the person. But Cooper Rush, the quarterback, I don't know what to expect from that guy. So, and you're having him compete with former Texas quarterback, former AAF star quarterback, Garrett Gilbert. I mean, at least both of those guys are better options than Ben DiNucci, just in terms of the fact that they both have more professional football experience than DiNucci does. Heck, both of those guys have more football experience in general than DiNucci does. At least Garrett Gilbert's got a winning record as a quarterback in college. I mean, come on. So, man, things have just gone sideways in Dallas very, very quickly. And I'd be remiss if I didn't address the news dropping on the Titans. The Titans have released 2 players after the deadline. They've released 36-year-old cornerback Jonathan Joseph and outside linebacker / defensive end Vic Beasley. Now, I know some people are going to say, are either of those guys options for the Eagles to pick up? If I'm going to go after either one of those guys, I'm probably leaning toward Joseph than Beasley because even though Beasley's listed as an outside linebacker, he functions more as a blitzer. And my concern for a guy like him is similar to the concern you have for a guy like Connor Barwin, who is used to being that outside blitzing linebacker. And I try to turn him into a hand-on-the-ground guy, unless they're going to bring him into certain plays like a joker blitzer on third down. But I don't think the Eagles are going to go out there and do that. Joseph is interesting because he was having an okay year, okay? Before week 8 versus the Bengals, when he got exploited left and right by the Bengals' offensive passing attack, he was okay. And he played 375 snaps this year for the Titans. And I think that he's a guy I would love to see the Eagles bring in just for depth purposes, just to have another guy back there who has NFL experience. And I think that he's a guy that, he's probably not going to cost you a ton of money. He's somebody who, if you let him pass through waivers, you might be able to give him a very competitive offer with the promise that, basically he's going to be the guy who fills in if anybody goes out. And again, I think that's an option for the Eagles post-trade deadline. Like I said earlier in the show, I'm disappointed the Eagles didn't make a move. But if they at least go out there and bring in a guy like Jonathan Joseph, who was just released by the Titans, I'd personally like to see that move made. Let's get to the text board, 609-403-0973 with PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board, place your legal sports bets at PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now and then match your first deposit up to $250. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 609-403-0973 for the PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board, Dan EHT chimes in and says a couple things. He says, one, I don't think any potential deal stood out for the Eagles, and Gore is not what he was or what he used to be at all. It's not about what Gore used to be, Dan. It's that you want a veteran experience back who I think would be a better option at this point as a third down back / in between the tackles runner than what they currently have. They don't have a bruising back, and Gore can at least be that banger in between the tackles. And even though we saw Boston Scott do a good job on blitz pickup against the Cowboys, I don't know if I want to rely on a guy like Boston Scott to be continually my third down back. Now, the other thing that Dan and EHT chimed in and said, the Bucs and the Seahawks seem to have real problems with their quarterback pressure, and they are beatable. Saints are nowhere near who they were the last 2 years. Who else is out there in the NFC? The NFC seems to be more up for grabs than I initially thought. The NFC is definitely a conference that is not as top-heavy as the AFC. I will say that. I feel like the AFC is going to come down to basically 3 teams. It's going to come down to the Chiefs, the Steelers, and the Ravens this year. The NFC is completely different because every team has a serious flaw in their makeup. The Seahawks defense is just not that good, okay? The Rams are very inconsistent. The Cardinals have a couple good players on defense, but they can definitely get game planned and be exposed. You look at the Green Bay Packers, they haven't been healthy. And Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a lot of weapons around him. And if he doesn't get the pass blocking that he needs, he's going to have a lot of trouble getting the weapons to these underwhelming players who are not named Devontae Adams. You look at the South, the Bucs might be the best team in the NFC, but even they have flaws. You saw against the Giants game, they had trouble getting rhythm in their passing game. And part of that was because the Giants defense was continuously disrupting the receivers running the ball. They disrupted Brady's rhythm. They didn't get the run game off the ground. So if the Giants can do that, you tell me other teams can't do it too. So you're right, Dan. The NFC is more wide open than we realize. And by the way, the Saints, I don't think the Saints can win a Super Bowl, honestly. I mean, I think Drew Brees, unless he's going to find some magic pixie dust, he's not the Drew Brees he once was, that's for sure. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night. I'll catch you tomorrow night here on 97.3 ESPN.